So here again at the Australian Armour and Artillery Museum on day 3 of AusArmourFest. It would be remiss of me while I was here not to take the opportunity to take some footage of the T34, which is in the collection of the museum. It's out here and we can get around it so we can get some good shots of it. So the one that's shown here, of course, T34-85, forwarding the 85mm anti-aircraft gun into the large turret that was first introduced in the mid-war and was built on the original T34 chassis. So when Operation Barbarossa kicked off, Germany hadn't encountered any vehicles like this before during the operations in Europe, and the Russians themselves didn't have too many T34s in the field. Had a lot of older tanks, large numbers of older tanks, which the Germans destroyed in huge numbers, which effectively gave them the opportunity to wipe the slate clean and replace them all with T34s. At that time, early in the war, the T34 was fitted with a smaller turret that had a 76mm gun in it that was capable of dispatching most of the German tanks that it went up against early in the war. And it's one of the reasons why the Tiger I was put into rushed production. So this is a second or a later war version of the T34 with the larger turret sporting the 85mm gun. So you can see here one of the amazing things that I really appreciate about the design of the T34 is the suspension setup. Using a Christie suspension made it gave it exceptional performance cross country. Its wide tracks and its wide footprint gave it great performance over boggy ground, over snow, and it was certainly a vehicle that was designed by the Russians to operate in the environment where they anticipated that any conflicts would occur. Very simple construction from an engineering point of view. Flat plates, cut and welded together. Very few angles. Where you need complex shapes, you use a casting, but you don't use those unless you need to. Road wheels, you can see here. The drive is at the rear of the vehicle in this case here, so you've got the engine at the rear and the drive at the rear, and through that drive wheel there, which isn't sprocketed in the way that most other tanks that were sprocketed, that have plates inside the wheel for engaging the tracks and driving forward. So the front in this case is an idler wheel, and then here are the road wheels. Moving to the back, very easily accessible deck for servicing engine components. Most comparable Allied tanks and German tanks, you were servicing engines from the top, having to remove plates, remove decks, etc., and lift engines out vertically. Whereas this, you could just take off the bolts, or in the case of small repairs, just open up this hatch here and access the engine bay to see if you could affect the repairs that needed to be done. Spare fuel carried on the outside of the tank, and in that way it wasn't as necessary to have fueling vehicles travelling with the tank columns. The tanks could carry a certain amount of fuel themselves, and the objective would be, of course, to top the internal tanks of the tank off prior to battle, using that fuel, and then discard the tanks, or at least empty them out, so that you wouldn't have a fire hazard on the outside. Really good idea that the Russians carried forward after World War II and into the Cold War era. So the much larger tank much larger turret in the T85 compared to the T34-85 compared to the T34-76, improving crew ergonomics and improving their ability to service that 85mm gun. Certainly a tank that was built for a single purpose, not built to be comfortable, not built to be a home, etc., but built as a machine of war. And for that reason alone, you've got to respect the way the Russians went about designing and building their tanks in World War II. So there it is, the T34-85 at the Australian Armour and Artillery Museum.